Okay, good morning and welcome to everyone who's present and online. We'll begin our work sessions this morning with the biannual code updates.
Good morning, councilors. My name is Brent Davis with Community Development. I'm the Land Use Review Manager and the lead on biannual code amendments for this round. So moving into the slide presentation, just by way of background, the biannual code amendments are a periodic process where we go through and make minor corrections to items in the code that have either been brought forward by staff or by our customers to address things like unclear language, Scrivener's errors, occasionally minor policy changes. This is the second work session with council on this process. We are scheduled for hearing at the end of this month, and we wanted to come back to council just to present some changes that have occurred in the proposed amendments since our October work session, as well as presenting the Planning Commission recommendation on the Title 40 amendments. Next slide, please. So just an overview of the process. To date, we started the process late last spring and early summer, gathering proposed amendments, prepared preliminary drafts, and then in October we presented those to DEVE and got a recommendation to council to proceed. We had a work session with council in mid-October with approval to proceed, and in conjunction with that, we issued our 60-day notice to Commerce for the Title 40 updates, completed legal review of final draft amendments, and then we issued a SEPA DNS that was final on the 18th of January of this year, and had a hearing with the Planning Commission on the Title 40 updates on the 15th of February, wherein they recommended approval of the proposed updates and also one addition that stemmed from public comment received up to that date. And then we're here today for a work session to go over the changes, as I mentioned, and the hearing for adoption is scheduled on the 26th of March. Next slide, please. Just a brief summary of the SEPA process and the public comments to date. As I mentioned, we issued a DNS that was, and the comment period on that closed on January 18th. Through the SEPA process and through the Planning Commission process, we've only received 2 public comments to date. One was a comment supportive of proposed changes to the neighborhood meeting requirements for our Type 2A process, and those changes primarily have to do with who gets noticed and what the actual title of the meeting is. And then the other comment we received was from Department of Fish and Wildlife requesting an additional change to 40.350 to clarify that minimum culvert standards for driveways may be superseded by state law. And the Planning Commission did recommend to include that revision in this update, and that language has been added to the package. Next slide, please. So just to go over the changes that have occurred since the last work session, for Title 40, we removed proposed revisions for review standards for duplexes and triplexes, and we did that because that particular section of code was in the process of being revised, and I believe those changes were adopted yesterday with the housing options package. We added a clarification of the shared recreation space requirements for multifamily housing. We ran into an issue where we could not actually properly interpret the language of the code because it was self-conflicting, and so we proposed an amendment to fix that. And then, as I mentioned, we added a notification for the driveway culvert standards that there may be state laws that supersede the county's minimum requirements. There's also been a change to the Title VIII updates. We have removed proposed changes for senior discounts for dog and cat licenses. The animal control manager would like to do more budget analysis on the impact of that change before we bring it forward. Next slide, please. So just an overview of the scope of the changes that are proposed. We have a revision to the definition of isolated wetlands to address ecology's concerns that are holding back the final approval of the shoreline amendments that were adopted last year. We're revising the rural ADU size and access standards to be consistent with the urban standards that were adopted yesterday. We proposed removal of garages from the cottage housing floor area. This was an item that could have been included in the package you looked at yesterday. However, we were operating under prior council direction to keep it in the biannual code updates. As I mentioned, we're clarifying the shared recreation space requirements for multifamily housing. Increasing the public notice radius for land use applications from 300 to 500 feet in the urban area, from 500 feet to 1,000 feet in the rural area. We're proposing to require a pre-application conference for major home businesses, and this is primarily because we get a lot of applications for major home businesses that are very far from meeting the standards, and we feel it's important that people have an opportunity to understand the scope of what's allowed in those under the home business code, because we're seeing a lot of applications that are quite far from meeting those standards. And then lastly, we're updating the developer neighborhood meeting requirements for type 2A process. We're changing the name from neighborhood meeting to community meeting to make it more clear that it's not a neighborhood association process. And there's also some changes to the notification requirements in terms of who gets notified of that meeting. And lastly, we're proposing to allow that meeting to continue to be in a virtual or hybrid format. The current code doesn't allow that, but we have been allowing that since COVID. Next slide, please. In terms of the other titles, Title VIII, Animal Control, clarifying the definition of running at large, correcting language related to the urban growth area, adding a potentially dangerous dog licensing requirement. So if a dog has been designated potentially dangerous, there's an additional licensing fee. Changing language to simplify cost recovery for the hearings examiner if an applicant loses an appeal, and then adding some language regarding rabies vaccination reporting. Other titles with changes, restricted firearms discharge, eliminating language to match current practice, and there's a section being added regarding public disturbance noises, clarification of nuisance language, and then in regard to the building code, proposing to remove the current exception for agricultural structures, and that's being driven by the need to be consistent with the recommendations of the State Building Code Council. Next slide, please. So on February 15th, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend to the County Council that it approve the proposed fall biannual code updates as presented. And just to be clear, that recommendation pertains particularly to the Title 40 recommendations. The Planning Commission did not review the other proposed amendments. Next slide, please. So the request today is authorization to proceed with these amendments to public hearing on March 26th. Thank you. And I'm available for questions. April is available online. We have other staff here as well.
Super. Thank you so much. I want to just make a couple introductory comments before I turn it over to the council for questions. We have challenges because of the way the charter is, and the public just doesn't realize that. I mean, the council is responsible for policy and code, yet we have no staff. And so we rely very heavily on the staff that day to day is enforcing that code in different ways in the executive branch. So as important as your input is to us when we kind of ask you to do things, and over the years we've said, well, we don't want to go beyond state requirements. You know, we want to kind of minimize the impact we have on our code to ensure public well-being, public safety and health, but we don't want to go beyond. We're always looking to eliminate costs, redundancy, code that's unnecessary. We've had public health come to us recently with some of those very measures, especially most recently on septic systems that, you know, time is money, and they made some changes that we approved. They suggested some changes that we approved that eliminated not only costs, fees, but also time, and thereby increasing efficiency in that topic. So we're always looking for that kind of efficiency, and we have really appreciated public health making those proposals. So in one of the first slides, I mean, I see DEEP's represented here. So we really rely very heavily on the input of our experts, civilian experts out in the community, our volunteers, DEEP, particularly to provide those, hey, here's a problem in the code. Here's how it's been misinterpreted. Here how it's excessive. Here how we can change it. And then the other area was customers. You know, what are the customers experiencing? You know, what suggestions do they have? So as much as the robust inclusion of all those comments, I just want to publicly thank those participants that have helped inform the staff where they could see changes to the code. So just kind of as an introductory thank you for this. We appreciate it every year. I will have some specific questions on the firearms discharge because I missed that as to what you were proposing there. But let me open it up to other counselors for questions. Sue?
Yeah, thank you. I have a few questions. So I just went through each of these, so I'll just run down my questions as I go. So thank you for being here and preparing all of this. So the definitions of adult family homes, it wasn't clear to me if this is adding to additional residents or within the 6 that are allowed.
So state law allows for addition of up to 2 additional residents after a certain time of performance in successful inspections and some other criteria. And our current definition does not allow for those expansions if a home qualifies, so we're just proposing to reflect the state language.
So it could go up to 8?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, and then related to the culvert sizing, does that relate to if it could be a fish-bearing stream and possible fish barrier?
Yeah, it relates to whether or not a particular ditch or conveyance is also a water of the state. There are cases where the county's roadside ditches carry natural stream flow and are technically waters of the state. So whether it's fish-bearing or not, there is state code that could apply. And so the intent here is just to make it clear in our code that there may be superseding requirements.
Great, thank you. And let's see. Oh, on the neighborhood meeting, under 2B, I think it is now 3, all landowners within a radius of 500 feet of the proposed site. This is for notification, I believe. and I know there's another section that talks about notification. I wonder if that should be consistent with what is being proposed in the other section related to notification.
That was the intent. I'll double check that and clarify it for the hearing package.
Right, because right now it says 500 feet.
Can you tell me which page that?
It's page 4, under 9B. Oh, I guess it's number 4 now. Or it's 3 or 4. I'm not sure where it's changing. All landowners within a radius of 500 feet.
Yes, that was an oversight.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, and then I did wonder, I had a question about this expired pilot program. So it sounds like nobody applied to do this pilot program, so there's no real evaluation or results from...
Correct,
that.
and it has long expired.
Oh. Okay, I'm getting there.
You can take your time, or we could skip around to other councilors and then come back once you...
Okay, I think the main thing on this page, and then somebody else can take a turn, is related to the increasing the public notice. And I know that I think there was, I think we're looking at following what Snohomish County is doing with the increase to 500 and 1,000 feet for notification.
April did that research, so if...
Right. Well, what my question really is, I think Snohomish has also a minimum number of households notified, which I believe was 20. I think that may have been in an earlier iteration of this notification. So I'd be interested in that minimum number of households notified being included in the notification, in addition to the 500 and 1,000 feet.
I saw April on. April, are you there? Do you have more detail?
Yeah, April Firth, Director of Community Development. You're right, that is in their code and was in the original presentation that I gave to council. I did not have the impression that that was part of what was approved for me to go forward in the biannuals in that work session with council, which is why I did not include it.
It was my assumption that it would be included, so.
Okay.
So anyway, that would be my recommendation, to include that 20, because I live in a rural area, so I was trying to figure out with the 500 and 1,000, how many people would actually be notified if I did something on my property, and doesn't add up to very many people.
So if we can, just for direction for the staff before the hearing, does the rest of the council agree with adding the minimum number?
Yeah, so thanks for that follow-up. We always need to do that. So I would say from my point of view, at least what I've heard from the council before, but only what I personally believe, we've had a lot of complaints from the community on not being notified, and it varies by project and how much impact there is. But what I've heard generally from the council is that we want to expand as best we can notification and inclusion in the community throughout the process, and I fully support that. On the other hand, we need to know what our capacity is and how much any of these changes would cost to accomplish. So I am supportive. I just want to make sure we have the capacity to do it if we go to 1,000 feet on whatever projects apply, but that the cost wouldn't break your bank.
Well, I think certainly any additional costs that are incurred are fee recoverable, so we could account for any of those cost increases over time through fee updates and capture those costs that way. With regard to expanding a radius based on the number, we just need to make sure we have clear criteria as to how you do that, because in order to capture that 20 minimum, we might need to actually you know, we might have 25 that fall in that radius just because of parcel geometries and you know, that, I'm not suggesting that's a problem. We just need to make sure the code's clear about how we do that. And so if we do want to move forward with that, we'll have to do a little bit of work in the next week to make sure it gets in the package for the hearing, but I think we could certainly accomplish that.
Great, and I think, you know, if there were 25 within that 500 or 1,000 feet, then that's covered. But in my own example, I think it might be 5 additional, you know, just going out to the next properties adjacent to wherever the development would occur.
So I support Sue's request. That's 2. I think Glenn and Karen are both on. Michelle was not able to attend today, and she was accounted for. So Glenn or Karen, what's your input?
Yep.
I have had my thumbs up.
And Glenn?
Yes, I was
Okay, I
thumbs
heard
up
if
as
the-
well.
Okay. So hopefully we haven't task burdened you.
I think we have a model to pull from, and it shouldn't be that difficult. Okay.
Super. So did you still have more? Go ahead, Sue.
I think I'm winding down here. Related to the, so this is the other packet.
Counselor
and,
Marshall, can I
really-
ask a question before we move on?
Yes.
What was the minimum that was decided on, the minimum residences that have been notified?
20.
Yeah, Just making sure.
I suggest 20 because that's consistent with the other county that we're kind of modeling this after.
Thank you.
Okay, rural shooting ranges, and this applies only to commercial shooting ranges because I know there's recreational people just on their property in the rural area put up shooting ranges, and there's sometimes problems with those.
So is Bain on with us? Oh, sorry.
Good morning, Bain Wilson, Finance Services and Risk Manager with the Sheriff's Office. So this only has to do with shooting ranges that are commercial shooting ranges.
Thank you. And then, the potential dangerous dogs. A question that I have about that. I guess, how do you define potentially dangerous dogs? Because there's dangerous dogs and so it's adding potentially dangerous dogs.
April, was Donna able to join us?
Good morning, I'm here. I apologize for my voice. I'm pretty sick and I don't know, I'm fighting some sort of plague. There are 2 definitions in the Animal Control Code. There's one for dangerous dog and potentially dangerous dog. And basically the difference comes down to bite injury to a human versus killing of poultry for potentially dangerous dogs. So potentially dangerous dogs exhibit a behavior. They have not caused a severe injury, but they may have killed some livestock or chickens. And so we monitor those dogs and make sure that if there's any other incidents of aggressive behavior, they can then be escalated to a dangerous dog.
Right, but it's not breed related.
It is not breed related.
Right. Is there any requirement for them to post a sign about dangerous dog within?
So for the dangerous dog declaration, yes, there are signage requirements. For potentially dangerous, there is not.
Great. And then this is my final area of questioning, has to do with agricultural structures. And I wonder if this, I understand this is to be consistent with the state building code, but did the state building code change recently to eliminate this exemption for agricultural buildings?
I don't mind answering that one.
Okay.
No, the 2021, which will be adopted on March 15th by the state, but no, I don't believe that the state has had an ag exemption since 2015.
Oh, not since 2015, so we've just not updated this.
And that's just as far back as I've looked at. It could be even further back.
Okay, thank you.
Glenn? Questions?
Yes, thank you. I've got a couple here. I remember that I recall that we had this discussion. I don't even remember how long ago about the appeals assessment and the fee that would be, or the fee or fine, whichever you want to call it, of $3,000. And I don't recall what our ending discussion was. Is this based on the recommendation that we gave originally, or were there any changes to that?
Donna Goddard with Animal Control. This has not changed since the previous time that you saw it.
Okay.
It is just to basically simplify the ability in the code, the language, that makes it just easier for us to cost recovery those fees on a loss of appeal only.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then I was curious about the noise ordinance, and I think, was this the exact verbiage that was given to us by the sheriff's office? Is that correct? Okay. All right. It's got some squishy language in it, which says near the street, and that is a very ambiguous term. So, but we'll just leave it at that for now, and we'll see what happens with that. And then I was curious about the removal of NAC for notification requirements.
Yes, that's just the NAC chair, who's been receiving notices for every single one of those meetings and has indicated to our coordinator that they do not need those notices.
Okay, so the chair of NAC has mentioned that they don't need those?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then just one little correction or it's at least I think it's a correction. Very end of the Title 40 draft, or is it the other one? Non-Title 40 draft. Well, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't recall where it is, but it's where it changes the name of neighborhood meeting to community meeting. In the paragraph at the very end, it refers back to the meeting as a neighborhood meeting again, and that should probably be changed to community as well.
Thank you. We'll get that corrected.
Great. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Karen?
I have nothing further. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say you did not have a question?
I do not. No.
Thank you. Okay, so let me just go back one to just clarify one of Sue's questions. We did, as a council, restrict the ag exempt a few years ago, and so you weren't asking about that change.
No, I was aware of that.
Okay.
I just wondered, related to the state.
So I wanted to go back to the question I had about the ranges. And, you know, years ago, I had a number of constituents come forward and say, hey, my neighbor's shooting across my driveway. It's really dangerous, and I can't get him to stop. And the sheriff won't do anything about it, even though it's 100 yards, I think, from a structure, and because it was so ambiguous, they couldn't enforce any of the, so I'm not talking about commercial ranges. I'm talking about just people shooting in the areas of the county where shooting is allowed. And then, so that came and went. There were some proposals, not only by the neighbors that had suggested what the problems were, but I never saw anything come back, and I didn't see it necessarily here that we've complied with the sheriff's requirements to be able to enforce what I would call risky or dangerous shooting, because, you know, do you measure 100 yards from the perimeter of the property? Then what do you do with the easements? And that was the issue with driveways. People set up their targets on the other side of driveways, and people kept driving up and down. So anyway, what have we done with the code in that respect? And one other point is, you know, with our, you know, areas of the county that we allow burning, agricultural burning, not refuse, and that's changed because of all the development around the county. And the same pressure is on shooting. You know, where do we allow shotguns? Where do we allow long rifles? You know, that's a moving target, no pun intended, because of the development that's put in. And the pun wasn't intended. But so anyway, where are we at on non-commercial shooting range code?
At this point, nothing has come to me regarding that code, and we have a new administration now, and so it may have been worked on with past administration. So I'll go back to the sheriff and have a conversation with him.
Thank you. Actually, those one third area, and Sue touched on this as well, because I had a question. You know, driving around the rural community, see a lot of driveways, whether gravel or paved, that pave over the county ditch. And so I see that as a general problem on moving water. And it doesn't seem to be an emphasis of code enforcement, and I don't know what the code is. So if you have a ditch that crosses your driveway and then you pave it or just fill it in with gravel, what are the restrictions regarding culverts for our county ditches?
So the current code states that that culverts for driveways need to be a minimum of 12 inches. And then there's a criteria that if there's larger culverts upstream, that may increase the size. So unfortunately, those requirements can only be verified through a permitting process, whether it's a road approach for a new access point, or it's a longer driveway under a grading or building permit. So from an enforcement perspective, I believe that the only way those issues would come to our attention is if there was a neighbor complaint because there's a flooding problem caused by an inadequate crossing.
Okay, so so the law is there. It's just an issue of code enforcement. We'll talk offline about what I've seen and where I've seen it. Where I have seen permitting and county code enforcement and staff involved, yet the ditch remains blocked. So anyway, we'll talk. We don't need a code change. It's just a code enforcement issue. Correct. All right, any last minute questions? Otherwise, we'll need to give thumbs up. I have a thumbs up from Sue here on the dais. I have a thumbs up from me and Karen and Glenn. I don't see you.
Yeah, thumbs up.
Super. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the annual code update.
Thank you for your time.
Your counselors.
Okay, I understand we have one more work session this morning.